May 5th, 1821. The Atlantic winds claw at the shutters of Longwood House, rattling the wood like the restless hands of ghosts. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of mildew, sweat, and the faint tang of medicine, or perhaps poison. A single candle trembles in its holder, its light bending under the weight of the damp air. The room is dim, almost suffocating, and in the center of it all lies the man who once bent all of Europe to his will. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, conqueror of nations. Now, a frail shadow of that man, curled beneath heavy blankets. His skin, once flushed with the heat of ambition, is pale and waxen. Sweat beads along his temples, tracing slow lines into the pillow. Each breath is a struggle, a shallow, wet gasp that rattles from deep inside. Outside, the sea pounds the cliffs of Saint Helena, as though trying to batter down the walls of his prison before it's too late. Around his bed, a small audience gathers. Count Montholon stands nearest, hands folded, eyes fixed on the dying man with a mix of sorrow and something else, something unreadable. To the side, Napoleon's loyal valet, Louis Marchand, keeps a hand close to his master's wrist, feeling the faint pulse that weakens with every hour. Dr. Francesco Antommarchi, the Corsican physician, hovers nearby, glancing between Napoleon's face and a small box of instruments, knowing they are useless now. There are no soldiers here, no grand speeches, no banners. Only the silence of waiting. Waiting for the moment when the Emperor's defiance finally breaks. Napoleon's lips move. The room leans in to hear. His voice is little more than a whisper, a ghost of the commanding tone that once rallied armies. France. Army. Josephine. The words are scattered, fragments of memory tumbling into the dark. He tries to lift a hand, but the effort drains him. The sheets shift slightly, revealing how gaunt he's become, ribs pressing against skin, as if the flesh itself has fled. The watchers exchange glances. For months, they've seen the decline. The constant nausea, the vomiting, the sharp pains in his abdomen that leave him clutching his middle in agony. The British call it a natural illness, pointing to his family history of stomach cancer. But some here are not convinced. The symptoms come and go, worsen without reason, and sometimes he swears the wine tastes bitter. The candlelight flickers again, and in that moment Napoleon opens his eyes. There's a strange clarity in them, a flash of the old general who could read the hearts of men before they spoke. His gaze drifts across the room, settling on Montholon. The Count steps forward, bending as if to hear some final instruction. Vous savez. Napoleon breathes, you know. The words are almost inaudible, swallowed by the wind rattling the shutters. Montholon nods, but says nothing. The Emperor's breathing quickens. His head lolls to the side. Outside, a burst of rain slaps against the window, the rhythm almost in sync with his fading heartbeat. The doctor moves to check his pulse again, but Napoleon's eyes have already gone distant, fixed on something far beyond this room. Then silence. No more gasps, no more struggle. Just the distant roar of the sea, filling the void he leaves behind. In the stillness, Montholon straightens. His expression is unreadable in the flickering light grief, relief, perhaps even satisfaction. While the others tend to the body, he reaches into the shadows near the bedside table and retrieves a small glass vial. It's clear, almost empty, with a faint residue clinging to its sides. He slides it into his coat pocket with a motion so smooth, so practiced, that no one notices. The candle sputters one last time before dying, plunging the room into darkness. Somewhere out on the cliffs, a gull screams against the wind. By dawn, the news will spread across the island. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who crowned himself emperor, the scourge of Europe, is dead at 50. 1. The British will record the cause as stomach cancer, a death befitting a sick man, not a political threat. But in the years to come, whispers will grow, whispers of a lingering bitterness in his wine, of hair samples decades later that reveal lethal doses of arsenic, of the man in the shadows who was with him to the end, and walked away carrying a secret in his pocket. And yet, for now, the island is silent. The emperor lies still, the waves keep their watch, and the vial, that tiny, unassuming glass vial, disappears into history, waiting for someone, someday, to find it. The 22nd of June, 1815. Paris is heavy with summer heat and humiliation. Just 4 days earlier, Napoleon Bonaparte's army had been shattered at Waterloo, a crushing defeat at the hands of the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian forces of Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. For the second time in less than a year, the emperor has been forced to abdicate. The man who once seemed unstoppable, the general who rose from obscurity to command the fate of nations, now stands alone in the Tuileries Palace, staring at the maps that once glowed with the colours of his empire. The lines have changed. The borders have shrunk. France is not his anymore. He knows what's coming. His enemies are closing in. Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia have no intention of letting him vanish quietly into the French countryside. They want him contained, neutralized, or gone forever. But Napoleon believes he still has one card left to play. He remembers 1799, when he returned from Egypt, when France embraced him as a savior. He thinks of Elba, the tiny Mediterranean island where he'd been exiled just a year before. He'd escaped that prison, sailed back to France, and rallied the nation in a matter of weeks. The people had cheered for him then. Could they do it again? To number. This time is different. His enemies have learned. When Napoleon offers to abdicate in favour of his young son, the Allies scoff. They will accept nothing less than his complete removal from the stage. The British, in particular, fear what he might achieve if left free. They have not forgotten the 100 days of chaos he unleashed after Elba. They will not make the same mistake twice. So Napoleon makes a fateful choice. He writes a letter to the Prince Regent of Britain, framing himself as a political refugee, exposed to the factions which divide my country. I come, like Themistocles, to throw myself upon the hospitality of the British people. I put myself under the protection of their laws, which I claim from your Royal Highness as the most powerful, the most constant, and the most generous of my enemies. It is a gamble, one that reveals both his desperation and his miscalculation. Napoleon still imagines Britain as a noble adversary, capable of treating him with honour. He pictures a genteel exile on an English estate, perhaps even the chance to write his memoirs and shape his legacy in peace. But the British government has no intention of hosting the man they call the Corsican ogre. To them, Napoleon is not a guest. He is a threat, a man whose very existence could ignite war again. The Prince Regent does not answer Napoleon's plea. Instead, he delegates the decision to his ministers, who decide on a solution both ingenious and cruel. Exile to a place so remote, so inescapable, that no ship, no loyalist army, no miracle could bring him back. That place is Saint Helena, a volcanic rock barely 7 miles long. Saint Helena lies in the middle of the South Atlantic, 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. The island is surrounded by treacherous seas, jagged cliffs, and constant winds. There are no sympathetic locals to rally, no nearby ports to escape from. It is, in every sense, a prison built by nature itself. When the news reaches Napoleon, his face remains impassive. But inside, he understands the truth. Saint Helena is a slow death sentence. On the 15th of July, 1815, Napoleon boards the HMS Bellerophon in the port of Rochefort, escorted by British officers. Crowds gather to watch the fallen emperor depart, some jeering, others silently mourning. As the ship sets sail, Napoleon spends hours on deck, staring at the receding coastline of France. He will never see it again. The journey is long. First to England, where curious onlookers swarm the waters around the Bellerophon, hoping for a glimpse of the legendary figure. Then, without allowing him to step foot on British soil, the ship transfers him to the HMS Northumberland for the voyage south. Weeks at sea stretch into a test of endurance. The Atlantic is merciless storms batter the ship. The air turns damp and cold. and Napoleon, once accustomed to the grand salons of Europe, is confined to cramped quarters. Officers are polite but distant. Conversation is limited. Even here, surrounded by ocean, he can feel the invisible walls closing in. In late October, land appears on the horizon, the jagged silhouette of Saint Helena. Dark cliffs rise from the sea like the edge of the world. The island's capital, Jamestown, is a cluster of whitewashed buildings squeezed into a narrow valley. The air smells of salt and wet stone. Napoleon steps ashore under heavy guard. There is no ceremony, no welcome. He is led inland to Longwood House, a sprawling but decaying building perched on a windswept plateau. The walls are damp, the floors uneven, rain leaks through the roof. The gardens, once beautiful, are overgrown. It is not the stately exile he imagined, it is a cage. The British have chosen their warden carefully. Sir Hudson Lowe, a man of rigid discipline and cold temperament. Lowe wastes no time asserting control. Every visitor must be approved. Every letter in or out is opened and read. Soldiers patrol the island's cliffs day and night. A warship circles offshore at all times. Napoleon is told he may ride within a limited area, but any attempt to go beyond it will be seen as an escape attempt, punishable by force. Napoleon tries to mask his fury, but those close to him can see it. He walks the grounds with hands clasped behind his back, head tilted downward, as though calculating the shape of his prison. He talks of writing his memoirs, of telling his side of history, but his tone carries a quiet, growing bitterness. He has been beaten on the battlefield before, but this is something new. This is not war. It is erasure. The waves pound the cliffs at night, and the winds whistle through the cracks in Longwood's windows. As the weeks turn into months, the once great emperor begins to feel the weight of something more dangerous than armies or alliances: isolation. And in that isolation, the seeds of his final betrayal begin to take root. The first thing Napoleon learns about Saint Helena is that it is a place where time moves differently. The days are long, the nights longer still, and each morning brings the same grey sky and salt-stained wind. The island is alive with the constant roar of the Atlantic, an endless reminder that the rest of the world lies thousands of miles away. Longwood House, his new home, is less a residence than a damp fortress of neglect. The ceilings drip after every rain, which is to say, nearly every day. The walls are streaked with mould, the wooden floors warped from years of humidity. In winter, the rooms are cold and clammy. In summer, the air is thick and stale. The smell, a mixture of mildew, wet earth, and the faint rot of old wood, clings to his clothes, no matter how often they're aired. Napoleon's small entourage tries to make the best of it. General Henri Bertrand, dignified but quietly despairing. Count Charles de Montholon, whose loyalty sometimes feels too rehearsed. Emmanuel de Las Cases, ever scribbling, hoping to immortalize every word Napoleon utters. A few servants, including the devoted valet Marchand. They speak in hushed tones, as if the island itself has ears, and in a way, it does. Sir Hudson Lowe has ensured that Napoleon is never truly alone. The governor is not a soldier of the battlefield, but he is a master of siege. He surrounds Longwood House with an invisible net spies among the island's settlers, guards on horseback patrolling the roads, strict curfews for visitors. Every letter Napoleon writes is read and censored. Any contact with Europe must pass through Lowe's hands. It is not enough to keep the emperor confined. Lowe means to sever him from history. At first, Napoleon pushes back. He rides daily within the narrow limits allowed, savouring the freedom of open air, even if it's under the eyes of soldiers. He gardens. He dictates his memoirs, reconstructing his victories in such vivid detail that for a moment, in the telling, he seems to be back at Austerlitz or Jena. But the small defiance wears thin. The ink fades. The rides become shorter. The garden wilts. The island's weather conspires against him. Thick fog rolls in from the sea without warning, swallowing the landscape whole. Winds scream across the plateau. rattling shutters and snapping branches. Some nights, the rain pounds so violently on the roof that it drowns out every voice in the house. The damp seeps into his bones. His joints ache more each month. And then there is the boredom. The kind that doesn't simply pass time, it erodes it. Meals become the day's only markers, each one an echo of the last. Breakfast of weak tea and bread, dinner of salted meat or fish, sometimes gone sour. The wine is poor, sometimes tasting faintly of metal or bitterness. Napoleon mentions it once, offhandedly, but no one reacts. Saint Helena has no grand salons, no political intrigue beyond the petty feuds of colonial officials. Conversations circle endlessly around the same topics: the weather, old battles, and the unfairness of Lowe's rules. Letters from Europe arrive weeks late, sometimes months, their contents carefully trimmed by British hands. Lowe, meanwhile, becomes a presence Napoleon can never quite ignore. Tall, stiff, and cold-eyed, the governor avoids open confrontation, preferring to needle his prisoner with small humiliations. When Napoleon requests better furnishings for Longwood, Lowe delays or denies the request. When Napoleon asks to move to a healthier part of the island, Lowe invents reasons why it's impossible. Every victory the emperor once claimed, every city, every army has been replaced by these small, grinding losses. Even within his household, the sense of confinement deepens. Loyalties shift. Small arguments flare over nothing and last for days. A letter goes missing, later found in a place no one admits to putting it. Rumours drift in from Jamestown that someone in Longwood is speaking freely with the British. Napoleon begins watching his companions more closely. At night, the emperor sometimes walks the veranda alone, staring out at the black expanse of the Atlantic. No matter the hour, there's always a ship in the distance, a British war vessel, keeping its slow, ceaseless patrol. He imagines the orders on board. If Napoleon so much as sets foot in a boat, they are to fire without hesitation. Still, Saint Helena is not entirely lifeless. There are moments, rare but sharp, when the island shows its wild beauty: a burst of flowers after a sudden rain, a cliffside view where the sea turns silver under the moonlight. But for Napoleon, such moments only deepen the ache of exile. Beauty is another reminder of what he cannot touch, what he cannot hold, what he has lost. And as the months turn into years, his health begins to shift in ways that no one, not even Napoleon himself, can quite explain. Fatigue that lingers, stomach cramps that come without warning, a strange dryness in the mouth. It is subtle at first, easy to blame on the climate, the diet, the endless damp. But somewhere, in the back of his mind, a thought begins to take root, dark and unwelcome. Not all prisons have walls, and not all killers use guns. By early 1820, Napoleon's body has become its own battlefield. The fatigue no longer ebbs and flows, it is constant, a slow erosion of strength. The sharp pains in his abdomen strike like bayonets, twisting him into sudden, breathless stillness. He grows thinner, his once round face drawn and hollow. His thick black hair begins to shed in brittle strands, clinging to his comb and the pillow. At first, he dismisses it as the toll of confinement. The damp air, the poor diet, the endless stress. Any man might weaken under such conditions. But deep inside, he knows there is something unnatural in the way his health declines. The meals become suspect. Salted meat that tastes faintly of metal. Wine with an aftertaste so bitter it lingers for hours. The bread, sometimes, has a chalky texture. Napoleon begins to eat less, claiming a loss of appetite. But in truth it is mistrust that tightens his stomach. The British doctors, summoned by the governor, are quick to diagnose stomach ailments, pointing to his father's death from stomach cancer as proof of a hereditary weakness. It is a convenient explanation, one that requires no further investigation, no uncomfortable questions about what might be hidden in the emperor's food or drink. Dr. Francesco Antommarchi, the Corsican physician who tends to Napoleon, is not entirely convinced. He notes that the symptoms are inconsistent, that the emperor's health worsens in unpredictable waves. On some days Napoleon rallies. walking the garden or dictating for hours. On others, he can barely rise from bed. Antommarchi keeps his doubts quiet. To voice them openly could mean expulsion from the island, or worse. Napoleon himself begins to suspect poison, though he does not speak of it often. To accuse without proof would be to hand Governor Lowe the pleasure of dismissing him as a paranoid, fading old man. Still, he watches the preparation of his meals more closely. He keeps certain bottles of wine locked away, only to find, days later, that the corks have been tampered with. The island's gossip carries whispers too. In Jamestown, the settlers murmur that the British would never let the Emperor leave Saint Helena alive. Some say the poison comes by the governor's order, administered in small doses so the death will look natural. Others suggest a far more insidious possibility that the poisoner is French. Someone within Longwood, perhaps with orders from the Bourbon monarchy in Paris, sent to ensure the Emperor's permanent silence. It is not an unthinkable betrayal. Napoleon's return from Elba had terrified the royalists, proving that his mere presence could ignite the loyalty of soldiers and citizens alike. So long as he lived, he remained a danger to the fragile restoration of the Bourbon throne. What better way to remove that danger than to let him die of illness in a distant prison, with the British taking the blame? The possibility gnaws at him. He studies the faces around his table. Bertrand, loyal but weary. Las Cases, already removed from the island under suspicion. Montholon, smooth and ever present. Marchand, the silent shadow at his side. Which of them would kill for politics? Which would kill for a quiet fortune? One evening, after a particularly bitter glass of wine, Napoleon excuses himself from dinner. In his chamber, he grips the edge of the table until his knuckles pale. The pain in his stomach feels like a hot blade turning in slow circles. He breathes through clenched teeth, eyes fixed on the dark window as the sound of the sea pounds against the cliffs. When the pain subsides, a thought forms with cold clarity. They are not waiting for me to die. They are making sure of it. That night he orders Marchand to keep a private journal of every meal, every symptom, every irregularity. The valet complies without question, writing in a neat, unshaking hand. It is a small act of resistance, a quiet record for the future, should the truth ever be sought. But even with these precautions, the decline is relentless. His skin grows sallow, his eyes sink deep into shadow. He begins to suffer night sweats, waking to find the sheets damp and cold beneath him. His appetite fades almost completely. Some days he survives on little more than tea and thin broth. Outwardly, Governor Lowe remains unflappable. He sends supplies when asked, though always with delay. He visits rarely, and when he does, it is only to assert his authority. Yet there are moments, brief and chilling, when Napoleon catches Lowe, watching him with an expression that is not quite satisfaction, but something close. By the spring of 1821, the symptoms can no longer be ignored. Napoleon spends most of his days in bed, or seated in the garden, wrapped in blankets against the chill. His once rapid stride has slowed to a shuffle. The sharp, commanding voice that could cut through the chaos of battle is now hoarse, the words punctuated by shallow breaths. Some nights, when the pain keeps him from sleeping, he stares at the ceiling and thinks of Paris. He sees the glittering chandeliers of the Tuileries, the roar of the crowds on Coronation Day, the electric rush of victory on the battlefield. Those memories feel impossibly distant now, like dreams fading at dawn. But the most persistent thought is not of glory, it is of betrayal. That somewhere, perhaps in the next room, perhaps thousands of miles away, there is someone who knows exactly what is killing him, and is counting the days until it finishes its work. By the spring of 1821, Longwood House feels less like a sanctuary and more like a stage one on which every expression, every whispered word, every unguarded movement is part of a performance no one admits is happening. The air inside is dense with suspicion, heavy enough to choke. Napoleon's world has shrunk to a handful of rooms, and the few people allowed inside them. Bertrand, the dignified Grand Marshal, still carries himself with the posture of a man in service to an emperor. But his gaze is tired, his shoulders weighted by years of monotony. He rarely speaks against the British openly, perhaps. He fears being expelled from the island, perhaps something else. Montholon is different. Charming, attentive, always near the emperor's side, he seems tireless in his service. Yet his loyalty feels rehearsed, as though he is playing a role written by someone far away. He is often the one pouring Napoleon's wine, arranging his meals, passing along small comforts. To an outside observer, he might seem indispensable, but to Napoleon, the proximity is almost too perfect. And then there is Marchand, the valet. Silent, disciplined, utterly devoted. If Napoleon suspects anyone, it is not Marchand. The man is too meticulous, too steady, too present in the quiet hours when the emperor's illness robs him of sleep. Marchand records each symptom and meal in the hidden journal Napoleon ordered him to keep a record intended for the eyes of history. But even among the loyal, cracks are forming. The confinement wears on everyone. Small quarrels over trivial matters, a misplaced letter, a broken glass, a servant arriving late flare into full arguments. Old grievances resurface, spoken in low voices but with sharp edges. A word here, a sigh there, each one widening the gap between those inside Longwood. Napoleon watches it all with the patience of a man who has seen empires crumble. He knows this kind of division. It is how armies falter, how alliances break, how leaders fall. And here, on this rock in the middle of the Atlantic, division is more dangerous than open hostility. Some betrayals are subtle. A conversation with a British officer overheard and later denied. A message carried to Jamestown that contains just enough personal detail to prove it came from inside Longwood. Napoleon hears of these things from the island's loose tongues, the servants who drift between the governor's men and the French household. Lowe's web is wide, and it catches everything. Napoleon begins to test those around him. A casual remark about a possible escape slips into conversation with one man. A reference to a letter from France is offered to another. Days later, the governor knows both details. Someone is speaking. Yet the betrayal may not be so simple as a single traitor. Politics, pride, survival, they twist people in ways that make motives hard to read. For the French in Napoleon's household, loyalty to the emperor is weighed against loyalty to their own futures. A man might serve him faithfully today, only to sell him tomorrow if it means securing a safe return to France. The Bourbon monarchy has long arms, and it would not hesitate to use them. If Paris wanted Napoleon gone, there would be those willing to oblige, whether for gold, favour, or the quiet promise of protection. Napoleon suspects that some of the betrayal is deliberate, calculated to keep him demoralised. Information trickles in about France. News of royalist celebrations, of his old allies bending the knee to the Bourbons, of his name spoken in the past tense. Whether these stories are true or inventions of the British, they have their effect. Each one is a small blade, slicing away at his resolve. And still, the physical decline continues. The stomach cramps grow sharper. His appetite is nearly gone. Some days he refuses the wine entirely. Other days, he drinks without comment, eyes fixed on Montholon as if daring him to refill the glass. The emperor, who once manoeuvred armies with precision, now manoeuvres the people in his household with equal care, not to win battles, but to draw out the truth. Yet truth, on Saint Helena, is like fresh water scarce, and often poisoned. On one of his better days, Napoleon summons Bertrand and Montholon to his study. His voice is still weak, but his gaze has lost none of its old sharpness. "You both know," he says quietly, "that I will not die on this island by chance. It will be by design. And when it happens, the world will want to know who was holding the pen that signed my death warrant." The words hang in the air, heavy and deliberate. Neither man speaks. Bertrand stares at the floor. Montholon meets Napoleon's eyes for a moment, then looks away. In that silence, Napoleon knows. He may never prove it, never name it, never stop it, but the betrayal is here, inside Longwood's walls, breathing the same damp air, waiting for the end just as he is. By March of 1821, the slow poison of exile has become something far more literal. Napoleon's body is no longer merely weakened, it is failing. His legs tremble when he stands. His steps are short and unsteady, and the pallor of his skin has taken on a grey, waxen hue. Each breath is a shallow labour. The pain is constant now, a deep, twisting agony in his stomach that comes in waves, leaving him gasping. Some days he spends entirely in bed, his body curled beneath heavy blankets despite the island's damp heat. The once sharp glint in his eyes has dulled, but not gone. It flickers now only when he senses someone watching him too closely. Meals have become a ritual of both necessity and dread. A servant brings the food. Montholon often hovers nearby, overseeing its arrangement. Napoleon's fingers hesitate over the utensils. He eats slowly, tasting each bite as though deciphering a code. The wine is his greatest suspicion. Sometimes he drinks it without expression, other times pushing it away entirely. On the worst days, he drinks deeply, as if daring his unseen executioner to finish the job. Governor Lowe keeps his distance, but his presence is everywhere in the delays of requested medicine, in the refusal to allow Napoleon to move to a drier, healthier house, in the constant shadow of surveillance. If Napoleon dies, Lowe will have achieved his goal without ever pulling the trigger. One night, in early April, a violent storm descends on Saint Helena. Rain lashes the windows, and wind rattles the shutters until they seem ready to rip free. Inside Longwood, the candlelight flickers in the draughty halls. Napoleon lies awake, too restless to sleep. The pain in his stomach is sharper than usual, a twisting heat that makes him grit his teeth. Marchand sits nearby, reading quietly, when Napoleon breaks the silence. "I am dying," he says, his voice low but clear. "But not from nature." Marchand says nothing, his eyes fixed on the page before him, but his hands tighten slightly around the book's spine. Outside, lightning slashes the sky, throwing the shadow of Longwood's veranda across the wall. In that flash, Napoleon catches sight of a figure still, unmoving, watching from beyond the window. It is gone before he can be sure it was ever there. The next day his health takes an irreversible turn. The pain is unrelenting now, and nausea grips him from morning until night. He can barely hold down food. Even water seems to sour in his stomach. Doctor Antommarchi visits often, but his remedies are powerless. The doctor writes in his notes that the emperor's pulse is irregular, his breathing shallow, his body wasting away despite every attempt to restore him. Napoleon himself knows what's coming. He speaks less of his plans for memoirs and more of his burial wishes. He wants to be laid to rest in Paris, on the banks of the Seine, where the people can pass and remember him. But the British have other ideas. They will not allow his body to leave Saint Helena. As April bleeds into May, he begins to drift in and out of fevered dreams. Sometimes he is on the battlefield again, his horse beneath him, the air alive with cannon fire. Other times he is in the gardens of Malmaison, with Josephine, her laughter carrying on the wind. These visions are broken by moments of painful clarity, when the damp ceiling above reminds him exactly where he is and how far he has fallen. On the evening of May 4th, the rain returns, steady and cold. The household is quiet, each member moving softly, as though afraid to disturb the thin thread holding the emperor to this life. Napoleon barely touches his food. That night he asks Marchand to stay close. His breathing is laboured, his voice barely a whisper. He murmurs fragments: France, army, Josephine, as if calling out to ghosts. Outside, the storm builds again, and somewhere beyond the walls of Longwood House, a warship circles the island in the dark, its lanterns flickering like distant, watchful eyes. By the time the first light of May 5th begins to filter through the heavy clouds, Napoleon is slipping beyond the reach of the living. The silent execution is nearly complete. The island's work and someone's secret mission is almost done. The morning of May 5th, 1,000 821, arrives cloaked in mist. The sea is restless, churning against the black cliffs of Saint Helena, as though the island itself senses an ending. Inside Longwood House, the air is heavy with damp and anticipation. Everyone moves slowly, speaking in whispers, as if the very sound of a voice might tip the scales between life and death. Napoleon lies propped against pillows, his once imposing frame now a fragile outline beneath the blankets. His skin is pale, almost translucent in the dim light. Beads of sweat glisten on his forehead, but his body feels cold to the touch. The sickness has hollowed him out, yet there is still something in his expression, a flicker of defiance, as though, even at the edge of death, he refuses to surrender entirely. Marchand is at his side, a damp cloth in hand. Bertrand and Montholon stand nearby, silent sentinels, their faces carved into masks of solemnity. Dr. Antommarchi hovers in the background, his tools useless, his hands folded behind his back. Outside the bedroom door, the muffled footsteps of British guards pace back and forth. Even now, the prisoner must be watched. Around mid-morning, Napoleon stirs. His lips move, forming words that are barely audible. France, the army, Josephine. But the room leans closer, straining to catch each fragment. Then, as if summoning the last of his strength, he whispers something else, a single sentence, spoken in a voice thin as thread. Tête d'armée, head of the army. These are his final words. At 5:49 p.m., his chest rises one last time and falls. The Emperor of France is gone. For a moment, the room is utterly still, save for the soft patter of rain on the roof. The death is immediately recorded as stomach cancer. It is neat, respectable, and politically safe. The British waste no time preparing the formal announcements. Governor Lowe is informed, and the news spreads quickly across the island. By nightfall, ships anchored offshore are already signalling to the outside world. Napoleon Bonaparte is dead. But for those in the room, the moment is far from clean or resolved. Marchand notes something strange as they begin to prepare the body. The skin, though pale, is firm. The features unnaturally well preserved. There is no rapid collapse, no slackening of the face, as is common in the newly dead. If anything, Napoleon's expression appears calmer than it had in life these past months, almost as though he had slipped into a dreamless sleep. The body is dressed in a green uniform, the same he wore at Austerlitz, complete with the red ribbon of the Legion of Honor. A sword is placed at his side. The preparations are carried out in silence, but every so often one of the attendants glances at the face, as if struck by its unchanging stillness. 2 days later, the autopsy is performed. Dr. Antommarchi conducts it under British supervision, his notes guarded and his conclusions carefully phrased. He confirms the official story: lesions in the stomach, consistent with cancer. But in private, he mutters to Marchand that the findings are curious. The tissue damage does not match the level of suffering Napoleon endured, and certain signs, the dryness of the body, the unusual preservation, seem inconsistent with the diagnosis. The burial is set for May 9th. A small procession winds its way from Longwood to the Valley of the Geranium, a quiet, sheltered spot Napoleon had admired. The coffin is made of 4 layers: tin, mahogany, lead, and oak, each sealed tight. British officers march alongside the French mourners, their uniforms immaculate, their expressions unreadable. When they reach the gravesite, a dispute arises. The French wish the tombstone to bear his name and title Napoleon, Emperor of the French. The British refuse. The stone will read only Napoleon. Nothing more. The compromise is no compromise at all. The name alone must suffice. The coffin is lowered into the earth. The sound of dirt striking the wood is muffled, almost gentle, under the overcast sky. Those who loved him stand in silence. Those who feared him are already thinking of what comes next. In the years that follow, the grave will remain a point of pilgrimage for those who dare the journey to Saint Helena. But whispers linger. carried in letters and late-night conversations. Whispers of a death too convenient, a body too well preserved, a truth too dangerous to be spoken openly. And then, in 1840, when Napoleon's remains are exhumed to be returned to France, the whispers become shouts. Witnesses claim the body looks almost untouched by time, the skin intact, the features recognizable after 19 years in the ground. Arsenic, they say, can do that, preserve a body long after death. The question, once quietly murmured, is now impossible to ignore. Was the Emperor of France truly felled by illness or by a hidden hand? History likes to wrap itself in neat endings, but Napoleon's death refuses to stay tidy. In the decades after Saint Helena, the story refuses to rest in its grave. Letters surface. Testimonies emerge. And then, in the 1962nd, science delivers a revelation. Hair samples from the emperor's deathbed contain arsenic levels far above normal enough to kill, especially in the slow, deliberate doses that leave symptoms eerily similar to stomach cancer. The British are the obvious suspects. They had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Governor Lowe had every reason to see Napoleon dead, his political career resting on keeping the former emperor contained forever. And yet, there's a shadow that doesn't point toward London at all. Some historians begin to suspect the French. The Bourbon monarchy in Paris had more to lose from Napoleon's survival than the British did. One letter from a royalist official, recovered long after the fact, hints at ensuring the permanence of the peace, a phrase that suddenly sounds sinister when you consider who might disrupt that peace. And then there is Count Montholon, the man who poured Napoleon's wine, who hovered over his meals, who stayed close until the final breath. After the emperor's death, Montholon returned to France with a comfortable fortune far more than his official position could explain. In the ledger of history, that coincidence is hard to ignore. We may never know the truth, whether it was the British, the Bourbons, or a traitor within Longwood's damp walls. The result was the same. Napoleon's final battle wasn't fought with cannons or cavalry. It was fought in a silent war of drops and doses, in the still air of a mouldy room, until his body gave way and the tide of history washed over him. Saint Helena remains a lonely outpost in the South Atlantic, its cliffs battered by the same winds that rattled Longwood shutters 2 centuries ago. But if you stand in the valley of the Geranium, where the emperor first lay buried, you can almost feel it, the weight of the betrayal, the unspoken truth that followed him into the earth. Because in the end, Napoleon Bonaparte did not die simply as an exile. He died as a man surrounded by enemies, unsure which of them wore the mask of a friend, and history has yet to unmask the one who dealt the final blow. If you've made it this far into the shadows of history, then you know the past is never as clean as the textbooks make it seem. There are always hidden hands, quiet deals, and secrets buried in graves that refuse to stay closed. If you want more dark, gripping stories like this, tales of power, betrayal, and the truths they never taught you in school, subscribe and join me on this journey into history's darkest corners. Until next time, watch the wine in your glass and the friends at your table